Hi, everyone, and welcome. Thank you so much to Yasmin and Truman of the Slow Factory for helping me prepare for this class. And I wanted to extend a lot of gratitude to the Open Education, not just, I'm sorry, to the Slow Factory, not just for inviting me to offer this class today, but also for its ongoing work to offer free classes that center Global South and BIPOC perspectives, and for its deep commitment to um, radical democratic and open education. So welcome everyone. I wanted to begin this class by honoring both our land ancestors and also our many spiritual ancestors. I am here in Brooklyn, also known as Lenapehoking, and today I'm going to be talking about spiritual activism. Um, and I think it's really important for us to acknowledge, as you may have seen in some of the um, Instagram posts leading up to this, that this is really a sort of infinite river of insight and knowledge. None of what I'm presenting here are new or original ideas. I am really just passing on from one generation to the next what I have learned so far in my own journey as a spiritual activist. So, let's see if I can change. Oops, sorry. Here we go. So I wanted to just note that I will be um, talking, but also reiterating what you see here on the slides themselves, understanding, of course, that this is a highly diverse and international audience. We have our wonderful ASL interpreter, Veronica, and also in recognition that not everyone here today in this class is a native English speaker. So hopefully seeing the words on the screen as well as listening to me speak will be helpful for those of you who do not have English as your first language. And props to you if English is your second or third language. It's always wonderful to have all of those different linguistic windows of conceptual knowledge open to you. So I wanted to start with an overview of what we'll be talking about and what spiritual activism means. People define this term in different ways, but for me, spiritual activism refers to the integration of inner transformation with externally focused efforts to advance racial, social, and economic justice, environmental sustainability, and really to create a society that honors what is sacred. This course is an introduction to engaged Buddhism, which is one of several forms of spiritual activism that exist across faith traditions and indigenous worldviews all over the world. So our first section really is about honoring many lineages. As I mentioned at the top of the hour, really these teachings are like a river and they flow from one generation to the next. We don't come from nowhere. We have roots, we have ancestors, and we are part of a lineage or stream. This is a wonderful quote that was shared by Brother Phap Dong, who is a Vietnamese monk um, and one of Zen monk Thich Nhat Hanh's uh, very important teaching assistants. So let's start by honoring the lineages. I think it's important for me to clarify that spiritual activism applies to countless movements and leaders, both in the past and in the present, across many spiritual traditions, indigenous worldviews, and organized religions around the world. Some of these include Black liberation theology, um, the Dalit movement in India, Catholic liberation theology and indigenous relational paradigms that really prioritize the balance between personal, collective, and environmental well-being. So if you look at the photos here, of course, our time is way too short to even comprehensively name all of the different strains of spiritual activism, but I just handpicked a few to hopefully give you a sense of the sheer beauty and diversity of some of these movements. On the top left is the Chikpo movement, also known as Chikpo Andalan. And this was a woman-led forest conservation movement in what is now Uttar Pradesh in India. And these women might actually be the original tree huggers. And this was one of the most important sort of eco-feminist environmental movements of our time. The second photo here on the top right is, many of you will know, civil rights activist Fannie Lou Hamer, Black American civil rights activist. She worked on voting rights for Black Americans, women's rights as well. She was a deep community organizer and co-founder and vice chair of the Freedom Democratic Party, as well as co-organizer of Mississippi Freedom Summer. She was very well known for using hymnals and other kind of spiritual tools to cultivate resilience among all of the civil rights activists as they, did their very dangerous and intense work. On the bottom left, we have Archbishop Oscar Romero. He was a Salvadorian Catholic archbishop and liberation theologist who condemned injustice and spoke out against political repression amid the intensifying war between leftist rebels and government and right-wing forces supported by the United States in El Salvador. And he was sadly assassinated for his very radical theology. And then many of you will also recognize on the bottom right a spiritual activist who very recently became an ancestor, LaDonna Brave Bull Allard. She was a Native American Dakota and Lakota historian, genealogist, and one of the matriarchs of the water protector movement at Standing Rock. I just get the chills looking at these photos and thinking of the incredible legacy that all of these leaders have left. And I really encourage you to do some research and explore further what their different strategies were for sustaining their movements and learn from the richness and the beauty of their spiritual activism. So the question is, why is spiritual activism necessary today? Why am I even giving this class? Why am I so preoccupied or maybe even obsessed with this topic? For this, I would really like to invite everyone to close your eyes if you feel comfortable. Even lay down if that is a way that helps you feel more receptive to information. I'm going to just offer a reading that is a few paragraphs long. And I want you to don't fixate too much on every word or try to understand everything, but really just try to let it wash over you to help us set the tone for today. And these are the words of Joanna Macy, who is an environmental activist, a Buddhist scholar, and a deep ecologist. This is a difficult time filled with suffering and uncertainty. Like living cells in a larger body, it is natural that we feel the trauma of our world. So don't be afraid of the anguish you feel or the anger or fear, because these responses arise from the depth of your caring and the truth of your interconnectedness with all beings. Even when you see the world as a trap and posit a fundamental separation between liberation of self and transformation of society, you can still feel a compassionate impulse to help its suffering beings. In that case, you tend to view the personal and the political in a sequential fashion. Quote, I'll get enlightened first, and then I'll engage in social action. Those who are not engaged in spiritual pursuits might put it differently. Quote, I'll get my head straight first. I'll get psychoanalyzed. I will overcome my ambitions or my neuroses or my hangups or whatever description you give to samsara, the cycle of death and rebirth. And then I'll wade into the fray, unquote. Presupposing that world and self are essentially separate, they imagine they can heal one before healing the other. This stance conveys the impression that human consciousness inhabits some separate haven or locker room, independent of the collective situation, and then trots onto the playing field when it is geared up and ready. It is my experience that the world itself has a role to play in our liberation. Its very pressures, pains, and risks can wake us up, release us from the bonds of ego, and guide us home to our vast true nature. For some of us, our love of the world is so passionate that we cannot ask it to wait until we are enlightened. I'm going to just ring a bell and let those words and ideas wash over us. Okay, gratitude to Joanna Macy for that wonderful framing of spiritual activism. So, within that long quote, which you can explore later, there are so many concepts woven in, and we're going to explore some of those concepts today. These all have to do, again, with the integration of our inner transformation and our work to transform the external world. These cannot be separated, and that is the crux of spiritual activism. One quick note on these foundational concepts. Spiritual activism is open source, meaning no one owns these core concepts. There's not really an intellectual property concern here. It's important for us to recognize none of these concepts are new. They date all the way back to, people we may call our prophets or extremely advanced enlightened beings. We honor those who came before us by naming them, and we evolve by building upon the work of previous generations, refraining from ownership of these ideas, and of course, always sharing generously. One of the kind of mantras or core ideas of engaged Buddhism is the idea or the desire that the fruits of our spiritual work benefit all beings. So let's start with perhaps the most important, well, I don't even want to rank them, but one of the foundational concepts of engaged Buddhism. And that is independent co-arising or interdependence, also known as sunyata. Zen monk, author, and spiritual movement activist Thich Nhat Hanh calls it interbeing. Interbeing is non-binary. It transcends the duality of being and non-being. This insight is both the why that animates our activism and the how that grounds our solidarity and our strategy. This interdependence is really complex. Looking at this definition, it seems straightforward enough, but I'm going to give you an example to show how deep it is and how you could really just think about interdependence for days and years on end, decades even. If you're enjoying a cup of tea, you might think that that cup of tea is, right? It's in a state of being. That is true in one sense, kind of like quantum theory. However, that cup of tea also is not a cup of tea. It is actually sunlight. It is soil. It is the energy and care of the farmers who raised the tea bushes. It is oxygen. It is rainfall, the rainfall which comes from the trees that surround the tea fields. So within that cup of tea is a universe of non tea elements. And that is one of the reasons that in activism, if you really look deeply at any one particular struggle, you begin to understand how all of the struggles and all of the movements for liberation are in some way connected. Wisdom and compassion. These are also sort of like two wings of a bird. They are the guiding principles of engaged Buddhism. Um, so, uh, wisdom is translated as prajna, or it's the translation for prajna, and it refers to wisdom, intelligence, or understanding, what you see in the light of awareness. Compassion is the translation for Maitri or Metta, which you may have heard. And other translations for those include loving kindness, benevolence, or compassion in English. According to Buddhist philosophy, wisdom and compassion really work together. Both are required for the journey of enlightenment. Skillful means is another really important concept within engaged Buddhism, and something that I think is also critically important to any form of spiritual activism. Um, Wisdom and compassion are interdependent. So, intelligence is required to guide skillful action. It's required for the discernment you need to make the best judgment call about what to do in response to a condition that you see needs to be addressed. Compassion arises from that deep understanding of interbeing, that deep solidarity and the understanding that all of our um, movements and all of our well being are intertwined. So, really, wisdom and compassion are also inseparable. And that kind of unity can be seen in the statues of the goddess of infinite compassion, who has many, many names: Avalokiteshvara in Sanskrit, Guanyin in Chinese, Guan'um in Korean. She has 1,000 hands, and those hands are helping hands. They symbolize loving action to alleviate suffering. Um, and she, within each of those hands, in many depictions, you'll see an eye. And that eye is in each hand to guide the actions. So those actions are guided by awareness and understanding. So within spiritual activism, wisdom helps us determine the most skillful means to achieve change, using our individual strengths and talents in service of collective liberation, an approach that is essential to preventing harm and burnout. Activists are deeply motivated by a sense of responsibility to create a better future. I think any number of us who um, work as activism or work as activists or take part in activism are often really driven by a beautiful future that we can envision, as well as an intense desire to heal and to remedy past injustice. As we work toward our beautiful vision of the world that we want, it's essential to stay alive to the present moment. As the radical Black visionary author Octavia Butler says, the only lasting truth is change. So if we become too fixated on the past or too attached to a particular future outcome, we may lose sight of the dynamic and ever changing nature of our reality. We might suddenly lose our grip on what the best response is. We might become out of touch. So it's really, really important for us to stay present in the moment. And this is a quote by the Zen monk and Buddhist philosopher Thich Nhat Hanh. You can close your eyes if you want to as I read it. Engaged Buddhism is the kind of wisdom that responds to anything that happens in the here and the now. Global warming, climate change, the destruction of the ecosystem, the lack of communication, war, conflict, suicide, divorce. As a mindfulness practitioner, we have to be aware of what is going on in our body, our feelings, our emotions, and our environment. I'm going to just pause for one moment here. Sorry, and close the windows because I realize that it's very, very noisy. Excuse me. Okay, I'm back. Okay, so as we explored at the beginning of this class, inner transformation and our work to transform our external world are really inseparable. So one of the core tenets of spiritual activism, especially in the engaged Buddhist tradition, is that transforming oppression must begin with transforming oneself. This is because, we live in the world and activists are not immune to the forces of oppression that shape our society. We live within this paradigm of patriarchy. We live in capitalist, many of us live in an intensely capitalist society. We are brainwashed and marketed to and sort of socialized from early childhood to privilege our ego's desire for fame or for power. And because of that, we have to really take care in how we move through the world as activists. It's entirely possible to take the right decision for the wrong reasons, for example, or to reproduce harm or oppression to oneself or to other people through unskillful activism, even in the course, through unskillful action, even in the course of activism. People who have been organizing for a while, you might be familiar with dynamics that happen in some activist circles where, for example, patriarchy will begin to appear and men will begin to make the key decisions when it comes to what the group will do next. So that's an example of the kind of oppressive force that can bleed into organizing activities if that inner transformation doesn't happen. The Buddhist philosophy is full of lists. There are the 8 Noble Truths, the Fourfold Paths, the 3 Jewels. Buddhist philosophy they love lists. A really interesting one that is relevant to spiritual activism is the 3 mental poisons. And those would be ignorance, attachment, and aversion. Attachment is also sometimes referred to as greed, and aversion is referred to as hatred. And interestingly, attachment and aversion are sort of two sides of one coin. So obviously the antidote to ignorance is awareness, and it's important for us to learn as much as we can, again, to see what has been done before we arrive on the scene, and to really honor the foundation of where we work, um, so that we don't replicate harm or so that we don't repeat work that has already been done. Attachment and its opposite complement, aversion, can be troubling for activists because they can lead us away from what's happening in the moment. They can also obscure the most skillful path forward. So, for example, if you have an intense attachment to a certain outcome, like this particular bill or policy that we are lobbying for in the climate space must pass in this particular way, uh, that intense attachment could at some point get in the way of either a compromise or a shift in priorities or some change in the conditions on the ground, um, in which a more skillful response would be to pivot or to adjust or to stay flexible. So, how do we take care of inner transformation to make sure that we are kind of optimal in our skill at activism? We water the seeds of inner transformation. So, one of the most important strategies for inner transformation within engaged Buddhist thought is to direct energy toward wholesome or positive things or tendencies within yourself, and to withhold energy from um, harmful or unwholesome tendencies within yourself. And this, again, is common to so many faith traditions um, and spiritual traditions. So I want to emphasize over and over again, many of these concepts are not exclusive to Buddhist philosophy. They exist in many, many schools of thought. Um, but the idea is, if you have, for example, seeds of jealousy. Let's say you're in an organizing circle and you find that, one person is an amazing speaker and getting lots and lots of attention. They always get quoted in the media, and they are sort of the star of the show, right? So seeds of jealousy might arise. And the important thing is to acknowledge that we are human and all of the seeds for every possible emotion exist within us. It's natural for seeds of jealousy to be there, and so we don't need to judge ourselves or to um, shame ourselves that the seed is there. We don't need to repress the seed, but what we can do is acknowledge the seed and say, oh, hello, I see you, jealousy, and redirect our attention to a different seed. For example, maybe looking at the strengths of that person who is on the stage or who is being quoted, and really focusing on what that person is contributing to the movement or other ways that we can cultivate solidarity and inclusiveness and generosity. So, really, this is not about eliminating anything. It's really just about um, directing energy and redirecting energy in a way that feels constructive and, of course, loving to yourself. Um, this is, something that meditation supports a lot. But I want to just say another way that we can do this is through community. And this is one of the three jewels of engaged Buddhism: community and staying with like minded people, engaging with like minded people, and yeah, just really supporting each other in watering those beneficial seeds is a beautiful way to let inner transformation flourish. So, community or beloved community in the tradition of engaged Buddhism is called Sangha. And I will just read this quote from Thich Nhat Hanh again, that I think is just such a wonderful description of what a spiritual community can be. A sangha is a community of resistance, resisting the speed, violence, and unwholesome ways of living that are prevalent in our society. Mindfulness is to protect ourselves and others. A good sangha will lead us in the direction of harmony and awareness. Okay, so now let's talk about spiritual activism and sustainability. There is another aspect to spiritual activism that is extremely beneficial to movement work. Um, and that is that spiritual activism and engaged Buddhism in particular encourage us to cultivate the health and well being of ourselves as we work to create beauty, joy, and justice in the world. Each of us is part of the intricate web of interdependence. And so our own well being also matters to collective liberation. Another way that I like to put this is, we talk about the forces of evil in the world. Um, as we organize and mobilize to overcome those forces of evil, do not let them steal your joy, your health, and your well being, because then that's another soul that they've destroyed. So, in a way, we have to kind of buffer ourselves. We have to create a force field around ourselves so that we can have the stamina and remain effective, and so that we can really be in this for the long run. I think this is one of the biggest challenges for activists who are often responding to what really is a bottomless well of suffering in the world, and the incessant assaults on justice. I've just included here a little fern, and this is a video that's really sweet. The fern unfurls and then closes back up again, just reminding us to breathe in and to breathe out. Breathing is just a tool. It's a grounding tool to get us back into our bodies, to flood our systems with oxygen, and again, offer us a moment to reset if our minds start to go um, quickly in a harmful or stressed direction. So, the inner transformation and the self care aspect of spiritual activism is really important because our capacity to alleviate suffering and to change our world for the better is stronger when we are well rested, well nourished, grounded, and living in balance with nature. It's also more fun and joyful. Self-care is, it's a big buzzword. It has been a big buzzword for the last few years. I see a lot of different people in groups talking about self-care, and there's a whole sort of marketing machine of products that has grown around the concept of self-care. Um, I just think it's really important to say that self-care does not have to look like a spa treatment or an expensive new, I don't know, eyeshadow palette or an indulgent dessert. Self care can and should be free, in my opinion. And I think we have to kind of take it out of the realm of um, capitalism and merchandising and reclaim self care. So, a spiritual approach to self care might look like going to bed at 8 o'clock on a night when you feel exhausted, or if you've been having a really hard week and you feel run down. It might mean taking a break from consuming news and information. In engaged Buddhism, this practice is called closing the windows. And it's really a time to kind of sequester yourself and to recover. Um, I think we have had such a painful year of loss and violence by the state and violence by many states, I should also acknowledge that we're not just talking about the United States, but violence by many states around the world. Um, and because we live in a hyper connected world and we're always seeing the news of suffering happening everywhere, right, at our doorstep or on our phones, it is really, unfortunately, too easy to become completely overwhelmed by suffering and to start to feel like suffering is all there is. And that's when it's really critical to close the windows and to go back to those self care practices that nourish your soul and that remind you of the beauty and the goodness in the world. You know, pleasurable things like dancing or eating a really delicious piece of fruit or going for a walk with a friend. Um, those types of things help ground us in our bodies and remind us that, along with our terrible capacity to cause suffering, humans also have this incredible capacity to create art and music and delicious food and yeah, poetry, all of those things. And I think self care, again, it has been sort of marketed to us in a certain way that we start to think that self care, is this reflective thing that we have to check off like a duty on our checklist. But I think it's self care and community care are also really connected. Sometimes you cannot even do self care without the support of your community. And I think we can just look to some examples in history, like the US Civil Rights Movement, to see how community care was absolutely essential for sustaining individuals as they fought for collective liberation. So, for example, the Montgomery bus boycott, which was one of the most highly strategic direct actions of the US civil rights movement, it would have never succeeded without the Black American community organizing carpools and helping each other get to work so that they could continue to boycott the bus system and bring it to a grinding halt. So, what does community care look like? Again, it does not have to cost money. Simple offerings could be deep listening or preparing some home cooked meals for someone you know is really struggling, an activist who might be experiencing burnout, or childcare. A lot of people who are working in activism have kids and they're juggling kids on top of their activism and their normal jobs. So, offering to take care of someone's kids for a few hours, I know from experience when people have offered that to me, it's a godsend. It's amazing to have someone say, I'll take your kids for a few hours so you can take a nap, or so you can take a dance class, or so you can just do nothing and veg out and, watch a movie. And finally, one of the most important practices that we can utilize for both inner transformation and collective liberation is meditation. Meditation is a practice for cultivating insight, wisdom, compassion, forgiveness, stability, love, and a really tangible feeling of connection with all beings on earth. I want to say here, meditation does not have to look like sitting in lotus position and being absolutely still for, 20 or 40 minutes. Meditation takes many, many forms, and what works for one person might not work well for somebody else. Um, there are some people who meditate by chanting mantras. There are other people who meditate by running long distances. There are people who meditate by playing music, and music becomes their form of either individual or group meditation. Um, so I just want to remind everyone that there's no one right way to meditate. At the same time, I have found sitting meditation to be enormously helpful to me in cultivating my own sense of stability and spaciousness um, and peace of mind. It was really hard. And for many years, I thought that maybe I was just one of those people who couldn't do sitting meditation until I finally just reduced my expectations and started with 5 minutes a day. 5 minutes a day seemed like something I could handle. It didn't seem insurmountable. So I started with 5 minutes and then gradually worked up to, 45 minutes or so, and eventually have even participated in meditation retreats where, we meditate for 9 hours a day. So for someone like me who is extremely hyper by nature, um, it seemed impossible, but I'm here to say it's actually not impossible. You can train yourself, and just start small and don't judge yourself. As I mentioned earlier, meditation is a powerful way to sustain our energy and also our focus. Another reason that it's really helpful for spiritual activists is that it can help us zoom out to see the bigger picture or a longer timeline beyond the urgency of now. Many of the problems that activists are concerned with right now cannot be solved in our lifetime. And suffering is a condition of human existence. So it's important to, again, use meditation to cultivate that non attachment to the outcome. We work as hard as we can and we do what we can within our capacity, but we cannot become too fixated when we don't fix the thing. Um, Meditation helps us to kind of zoom out. So if we're dealing with a situation that is extremely painful, let's say something that's happening in your own neighborhood, like abusive police violence to your neighbors, it can feel completely overwhelming and like everyone is under assault. However, one of the metaphors that Thich Nhat Hanh uses is poison. If you have a drop of poison, for example, in a small cup of water and you drink it, that water will kill you. If you put that same amount of poison into a large lake, the poison is still there, but it won't kill you because you have a lot more spaciousness and capacity. And that poison has been diluted because you are able to sort of approach things from a much bigger perspective. Meditation is also important because being burned out reduces our effectiveness. I'm sure that many people who are active in organizing or have taken part in other forms of activism have experienced burnout and are probably familiar with how that exhaustion can kind of cause you to not be your highest self. It can cloud your judgment, it can make you impatient. It might cause you to snap at somebody who's actually a really important ally or to mistrust somebody because you're not thinking clearly about what their motivations might be. So, mindfulness, again, is there to really increase our discernment and our stamina and to cultivate peace of mind as we continue to do this work. So, with that, I wanted to just offer a very brief guided meditation before we go to questions. I have included two different types of meditations in this presentation, and I invite you to try them both. One is the metta meditation, which is all about cultivating compassion and loving kindness. And the other one is called the Anapanasati Sutra, which is also known as the 16 exercises of mindful breathing. That one I have found really, really helpful in that zooming out strategy. It takes a bit longer, so we'll focus on the meditation for today. But I encourage you to work with the 16 mindful breathing exercises. The first four in that guidance, there are 16. The first four exercises focus on the body. The second four focus on the sort of emotions. The third set of four focus on the mind. And then the last set focuses on what we call universal consciousness. And so you can see how even the structure of the meditation itself begins sort of here in the here and now, and then helps us zoom out to a much more spacious perspective. So, really quickly, although quickly is probably not the word we want to use for a meditation, but I'm going to just invite you to close your eyes again. Um, there are lots of different approaches to meditation and really not a lot of rules, but one piece of guidance that I feel is so important is something I learned from one of my fellow meditators, and that is that the depth or skill of your meditation practice can be measured by the kindness and the gentleness with which you redirect your attention when you find you're wandering. So if you find your mind wandering and you're suddenly making a grocery list, there's no reason to judge yourself or to berate yourself about that. Even in that active realization, you have already exercised your muscle of mindfulness. So don't waste any time beating yourself up about it. Just gently and lovingly redirect your attention. All right, so I'll start with a bell and close your eyes if you feel comfortable. Take a few deep cleansing breaths. May I be happy. May I be well. May I be safe. May I be peaceful and at ease. May you be happy. May you be well. May you be safe. May you be peaceful and at ease. May they be happy. May they be well. May they be safe. May they be peaceful and at ease. May we all be happy. May we all be well. May we all be safe. And may we all be peaceful and at ease. Okay, so that concludes the teaching part of the class. Can you speak to the whitewashing of the Buddhist philosophies on getting rid of your desires? I find this to be anti African spirituality, considering our ancestors were viewed as animalistic for their desires. That is such an interesting question. So I feel like there are a couple different questions in here. First is the whitewashing of Buddhist philosophies. And this is something I've definitely struggled with as an Asian American Buddhist practitioner who, my own family lineage is Buddhist and Taoist. And then born and raised in America, when I first became interested in reconnecting with Buddhism and went to a few different Zen centers to sit, I found that I was suddenly surrounded by, an entire room full of middle-aged white men who had a very intense kind of renunciation type of approach to Buddhism, which I think you've characterized here. It's really important, I think, to reframe that idea. Um, the the doctrine of non-attachment is not about getting rid of your desires. And I think that the teaching is to be fully present. That means being fully present to what is going on inside of you, and not sort of using your spirituality to spiritually bypass something or to say, I'm not attached, but actually you feel attached. I think it's really about looking at what your desires are and looking very truthfully at how you relate to those desires and to bring into alignment your relationship with those particular desires in a way that feels wholesome. So, for example, sexual desire. There's absolutely no um, prohibition in Buddhism against sexual desire or enjoying beautiful sexual relationships, unless you've taken a vow of celibacy as a monk or a nun. But for lay Buddhists, um, the teaching really is to approach sexual desire in a way that is mindful so that it doesn't become a sexual addiction, or so that you're not harming anybody in pursuing your sexual desires. And the same could be said for all kinds of other desires as well. How do you relate to your desire, and how does that consequence of desire, action, consequence, action, consequence, et cetera, what chain of actions and consequences does that desire set off in the world? And is that creating um, a rippling vibration that is beautiful and wholesome, or is it harmful? So hopefully that answers your question, Reem. Um, Next question is from Carolyn Nassif. Do you have any recommendations for books to read to understand more about these foundational concepts? Yes, I will add a list of books to the resource list that I'm compiling that will be sent out later, but a few to start with. Thich Nhat Hanh has authored dozens and dozens of books. So I think that would be a really great place to start. Um, I would also recommend reading Grace Lee Boggs. I think she also has really some beautiful writing on imagination and a sort of, and not a religious approach, but a spiritual approach to visioning the world that we want, and also collective liberation. The next question also says books on engaged Buddhism. So in the bibliography of Thich Nhat Hanh, Peace is Every Step is a great one. The Miracle of Mindfulness is another one. For those who are interested in interfaith exploration, there's Living Buddha and Living Christ. There's also his beautiful rendition of the story of the Buddha, um, which is called Old Path White Clouds. Um, so I would really start there. And that's not to say Thich Nhat Hanh is the only engaged Buddhist. It just happens that he is the teacher in the tradition that I've studied, but there's also Daisaku Ikeda um, and D.T. Suzuki. The Dalit movement is in some, um, one of the branches of the Dalit liberation movement is also based on a kind of radical Buddhism too. So there are lots and lots of ways to explore. I think once you read one book and you start researching online, you'll find many more will come up. And Miko Ono says, could you discuss the concepts of community that may be different from Sangha? For example, cultivating community with those who are not like minded. That is really interesting. That's a deep question, because I think in a lot of activism work, um, we are required to build coalitions with people who might not be like minded. Um, One example would be, let's see, in the environmental movement, I know that um, typically it has been a really secular movement, um, uh, science based. And not religious at all. But in recent years, some organizers within the environmental movement have developed the strategy of connecting with Christian faith groups, and to really talk to them about their sort of religious duty to preserve the planet. So, you know, I don't know if there's really any one answer to this other than it's going to look different every single time. And part of the um, mindfulness aspect of engaged Buddhism is to open our minds to other people, and to cultivate compassion so that even when we do differ, we may be able to redirect our attention and our connection to the areas where we share goals or share even types of suffering, um, and to um, stay true to what you know is right, and also be open to different approaches and other points of view. The next person says, how can we set healthier boundaries for ourselves in terms of using social media while also navigating the vast amount of info about trauma and violence? This is such a hard question. It's one that I struggle with. I have muted certain accounts that I follow, and I've unfollowed accounts of people who post traumatic content without content warnings. I've also taken breaks from social media, either removing it from my phone or setting up a password and giving somebody else my password, my passcode so that I can't get into it, going on retreat, doing social media fasts, for example. And I think the more often you do this, the more you realize you can step away from social media and come back, and you really haven't missed anything. The conversation keeps going on. Um, and yeah, it's about just doing whatever you need to interrupt that, reflexive picking up your phone and checking. So mindfulness is about being aware. Wait, why am I picking up my phone? Oh, I'm picking up my phone. I didn't even realize that. But actually, I think I'm just bored, or maybe I'm hungry. So I think interrupting the habitual response and creating little obstacles for ourselves, and maybe muting or even unfollowing accounts that post too much trauma and violence. You can always read about that stuff in the news when you feel you have the capacity. If we want to train to become a meditation facilitator, what do you recommend? I really love the Insight Center. They have lots of different mindfulness training programs. They have lots of programs specifically for Black, Indigenous people of color. Um, and they do a really great job of integrating the aspect of justice and sort of inner and outer transformation into their training. I have missed this, but I would love to hear more about my work. Oh, yeah, I completely forgot to introduce myself. I'm sorry. Um, I lead the creative and editorial team at the Rainforest Alliance. And that is an organization that is dedicated to harmony between people and nature, and working with a wide range of partners, including rural farming and forest communities, companies, governments, individuals, and of course the public. Can we get your contact info? My Instagram handle, I think, is on the last slide. It's at Jungwon217. And I recently just made my Instagram public, which was an excruciating decision, but I went public. So there it is. And you'll find that also in your follow up.
Thank you so, so, so much, Jungwon, for such a beautiful and grounding class and for answering as many questions as you could. I know that the general feeling in the chat today has been one of gratitude and just so much gratitude for these really important reminders in the work that we do and in navigating this journey that is our human experience. So thank you so much. And thank you, Veronica, once again for beautiful signing today. Everyone, we will be sharing all the resources and the meditations that Jungwon has introduced to us today through Slack and the newsletter. So you will be definitely receiving all of those. Um, And that's it for us. Jungwon, if you have any final words, please share with us, and then we will all, really sit with everything that you've shared with us today.
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you for being curious enough about this topic to come to this class. Even though I can't see you, I can feel your presence. I've been seeing some of the comments popping up in the chat and the Q&A box. I can tell that this is a really thoughtful, deeply engaged um, group of people who, you are also in the process of changing our world. And so I really thank you for um, being part of this community of people who are awakening and really trying to make a difference. Um, and I wish you well. I wish you ease. And I wish you health. And I'm just really, really happy to have had a chance to connect with you in this way.
Thank you, Jungwon, and thank you, everyone in our ever growing community. We will see you all hopefully next week for another class. And take care. Goodbye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.